overly focused on kind of let's just focus purely on kind of conventional military operations. Let's get really, really good at that. But it's a balance of, okay, maybe we spend a few less hours doing that, but a few more hours doing other things that are also important outside of that one, kind of mission. So it's balancing the hours they have, where they spend it. And I think the balance is too much on, kind of conventional military operations. And by doing that, we're assuming risk in all the other kind of operations that we have to do.
So it sounds like this is part of a larger discussion about whether to focus our military resources on conventional warfare or on irregular warfare. I mean, a lot of the analysis in Iraq and Afghanistan seems to indicate that the importance of distinguishing between measures of performance and measures of effectiveness is especially crucial in counterinsurgency. I mean, would you say this is an element of that, like, dichotomy?
Yeah, I mean, that's an element, and there's always a challenge when you're out there actually in it, is trying to, balance, getting the perfect information or getting certainty, and you're trading off certainty for time, right? And so you can't, in that environment, like developmental project, you can take more time, kind of get a good assessment, figure out how you're doing, and redo it. When you're in a in a fight, it's a little bit harder to figure that out. But that's kind of in all things. I mean, early on when we were looking for former regime element leaders, Al-Qaeda in Iraq, it's the same challenge, right? Do you go after the target that you find, kind of this low-level guy, or do you try to build the network? Almost like, for us, it was learning how to build it like like an organized crime ring in the U.S., dismantling that. Well, if you go after every low person and try to get them, you never really get anywhere. Eventually, right, you got to figure out how to get to take down the entire network, and it takes patience on that.
So I want to go back to what you were mentioning earlier about the military needing to investigate its own actions and use that data to then generate better decision-making. How would you characterize the balance between military practitioners and researchers cooperating and sharing information? Because, of course, the military has and will, of course, in the future generate a lot of data on its operations. Researchers would love access to that, but then they also, of course, want to publish their results, whereas the military might have some very understandable feelings and restrictions on the dissemination of that data.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a complicated story, but I think most times, most people in the military want it to be public because it's useful to them, and our advantage is really our leadership, our mission command, as we call it. So if you put it behind a closed door system where you need your ID card to get on there, nobody's going to get that data. And so it's great if you have it, but none of your own people are reading it. And so I think if it's out there, then it's, anybody can get it, but we can leverage it better than anybody else. But in terms of the data, I don't think I had a colleague write an article about how you would think we have all this data, because back in the day it was write letters and do all this kind of thing and paper copies. But a lot of times that data just gets purged when units changed over and just kind of erased and gone. And so the data isn't always there, as you would think. But I think usually, General Petraeus, would bring academics out there and have them kind of study it, whatever he could learn from them that would be helpful. I think there's just more of a desire to do that, and it's just kind of pairing up the right people. I mean, we had great success in the Combating Terrorism Center getting documents declassified, right? Because that's typically the challenge depending on who owns the classification. But anytime we can show Al-Qaeda for who they are, right, it kind of undermines who they are. They're hypocritical in kind of what they preach and practice in a lot of cases. So anything to undermine the organization is a win.
Yeah, this podcast is in collaboration with the Pearson Institute for the Study and Resolution of Global Conflicts. So there are a number of faculty members here doing really interesting research in conflict zones and sometimes in directly defense-related topics. Where do you see, in which area specifically, do you see the most potential for academics and researchers to make a concrete contribution to the defense literature? Is it in doing the statistical analysis on the large data sets, or perhaps in behavioral research, things like mediation and conflict?
I think probably the area that needs the most help is probably conflict resolution. I always would jokingly tell people it's real easy to take down a government, but really hard to kind of start one up and get it running. And so I think that's probably, and it's hard because, right, the total number of, the data is pretty small, but trying to get a better understanding of how you how you can transition into, conflict resolution and maintain a lasting peace. And the things that go into that, counterinsurgency figures into that. But, that's kind of where I see we can get some, there needs to be more help. Where does development fit into that? Where does economic aid fit into that? Right? Are we just fueling the insurgency, or are we actually helping the counterinsurgency? And I think there's a lot of uncertainty on that. Drones, right? Is there, a lot of work's been done in this recent years, but are they, do they create more insurgents or terrorists than we're killing? I mean, or is it being effective? And I think more work needs to be done on that.
You bridge that gap in many ways. You are an academic and also a retired military professional. If you were building that pipeline, the academia and defense pipeline, how would you construct it? How would you improve identifying information gaps where academic research might be beneficial and then providing that access in a concrete way?
Yeah, I mean, it's just figuring out how to have better collaboration. I mean, one is, investing in intellectual capital. I mean, it's more and more important as the complexity of the world increases. So increasing the number of officers and possibly senior non-commissioned officers that go to graduate programs so that they have the right intellectual tools they need to understand it. That's part of it. But also while they're in schools, they're meeting academics that will then they have connections and they can reach back to. It makes it a lot of stuff's built on relationships versus organizational construct. And so they can reach back to peers or at least understand, hey, I need some help. I can just call up a friend to come out here instead of not knowing where to start. But a lot of it is just kind of going out and seeing it. And that was the success we had with the Combating Terrorism Center. We would go overseas and then we would, see a problem that they wouldn't necessarily see or they wouldn't know how to address. Early on, it was the Haqqani Network. Who are they, and are they somebody that we can, engage in dialogue with? And so what we did was look back, okay, who the Haqqani say in their own documents, their own, going back for a decade, and it gives you a pretty good picture of what the organization is. And so, you look and you understand the organization better, and you can make an informed decision about how likely it is that they are going to be partners you can work with. But you don't see those problems until you're down there collaborating with one another. So it takes kind of, that collaboration throughout.
So we're going to take a really quick break here, and we'll be right back.
Chicago, the Windy City, the city of broad shoulders, the second city, is complicated.
Known for its legacies of segregation and political corruption, Chicago has a lot to grapple with.
On Chicagoland, we bring you conversations with activists, journalists, politicians, and others who are working to address these issues.
You can find Chicagoland wherever you listen to podcasts.
From University of Chicago Public Policy Podcasts,
this is Chicagoland.
All right, so welcome back. Let's go and pivot to a different topic now. So it's another one that you've written about, sir, quite a bit. I'd like to shift towards the topic of cyber in warfare, particularly as it pertains to Russian aggression in Ukraine. You highlight some of the developments in this field in a number of articles you wrote for the Modern War Institute back in 2018. Can you expand on this a little bit?
Yeah, so I spent a couple years from 2016 to 2018 going back and forth with General Abizade as the senior defense advisor to Ukraine for defense reform. So got to kind of research and see kind of what they were doing over there. And so, they've basically been using since 2014 that area really as a test bed to test their equipment, test their cyber capabilities, test their information operations against a real enemy, and seeing some pretty significant, effects coming out of that. And so in terms of cyber, so the first time you kind of saw a cyber used with a conventional military operation was in 2008 by the Russians when they went into Georgia. And then they kind of perfected that over the next few years while they were focusing on improving what they learned from their incursion into Georgia. We were focused on Iraq and not really paying attention. And so really what you see now what we've seen in Ukraine is the ability to kind of combine cyber information operations and lethal operations all together to have an effect. And so that's kind of unique. And so the one thing I guess you could thank the Russians for is because before Ukraine, everybody kind of understood cyber as a threat kind of at the strategic level. Are you going to get our banking systems? Or are you going to get some kind of infrastructure, command and control thing? But they've shown how cyber can actually have lethal effects at the tactical level. So I guess we can thank them for that. So we can understand the cyber person isn't just off on an island now. They are more valuable.
I feel like it wasn't that long ago when you had defense experts or people in the establishment saying that cyber threats are really limited in their military applicability due to the low or the unreliable rate of success. I mean, I remember reading back in like 2010, 2011, the likelihood of successfully hacking and manipulating an adversary's network for military applications was too low to be reliably employed, and that's clearly no longer the case as we see in Ukraine. So with all that said, you said we kind of took our eye off the ball in 2008, because the U.S. was focused so much in the Middle East. Are Western militaries now, such as the U.S. and NATO, adequately prepared to deal with these evolving cyber threats? I think there's an understanding that the threat is real, as we saw by the elevation of U.S. Cyber Command to a full, independent, unified combatant command just a couple of years ago. But, where are we in this?
Yeah, cyber is a little more challenging to get at because you use the weapon once. The fact, the weapon, the code or whatever, it's kind of you only get to use it once, and then it's out of the bag. People can copy it or whatever else. So cyber is a little trickier. But I think if you look at collectively at what the Russians are doing across the board, and understanding the democratization of technology and the states that have lost our monopoly of violence. And so I prefer to look at, okay, let's look at the capabilities the Russians have and whether you face them or someone else as this technology diffuses. That's what the concern is. So you've got the cyber, you got the information operations, but also their electronic warfare capability. And I would say our defense establishment as by and large is not capable or not responding adequately to what we're seeing done. There's a lot of rhetoric to it, but what we always want to do is defer to a technological solution, a technical solution, and oftentimes it might just be changing how we operate. But if that's inconvenient, then we don't want to do it.
So would you say instead of coming up with these technical responses to these threats, it's again a matter of changing the way we think about the problem, similar to what we mentioned about the measurement revolution? Right.
It's both. Technology has a role in it. It's kind of like think of the improvised explosive devices or IEDs in Iraq that were killing a lot of American soldiers and Allied soldiers, coalition soldiers. So for that, a lot of people's solution was we just need to get jammers. We need to have some kind of technology, build this giant IED task force that costs millions or billions of dollars and 400 people to look for a solution to this problem. It's a weapon or a technique. Last time I looked, we're not looking for a solution to stop bullets or stop field artillery rounds. It's not possible. Right, and so in this case, and then others were looking at what was it? Ultimately became the IED task force kind of its origination kind of split into two: one joint IED defeat organization, JIDO, and then asymmetric warfare group. And others were more like General Cody, who was a vice chief of staff in the Army, saying we got to get left of boom. We got to find the emplacers of this. Right, it's all about war fighting. It's a human fight. We have to find the humans that are putting them out there, and that's what we have to counter. And so it's the same thing for this, right? Those technology are tools, but you have to figure out how to fight the humans or what the role the technology plays in there. But we have a bias to look for technology as a solution. If there was talk of a revolution in military affairs during the first Gulf War, right? This is the way future of combat will be. We'll just have sensors out there. We can identify everything, standoff weapons, engage them. That works well in the desert, but anywhere else it's not really helpful. It didn't help me in the streets of Ramadi or Fallujah in 2003.
Sounds like it's going back to, or if I rephrase what you've kind of talked about, instead of a dedicated unit or group of specialists in the realm of cyber, it's more about educating that infantry brigade commander on how cyber is going to affect the battlefield and how they will need to train their personnel to respond to those threats.
Right, exactly. And it's not to say that you don't need to have a separate cyber command kind of more at the strategic level, but you have to figure out how to integrate them at the tactical level. An example like an information operation. So in the U.S. Army, they're kind of diffused across, the functions are diffused across the staff, and it's really an afterthought, right? They come up with the plan, and then we kind of figure out where does I.O. maybe fit into this plan that we're doing. And for the Russians, it's completely reversed. I.O. information operations may be their main effort, and they're figuring out how their lethal or kinetic operations kind of support that effort. And it's a major consideration when they're doing their planning. And for us, it really is just an afterthought.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit more? I know that Russia and Ukraine